Welcome everyone, nice to have you all here. This was supposed to be an interactive workshop, so you're sitting in like a movie theater, so maybe I'll have to be the one who's interactive and speak to you all.
We want to take and strengthen the narrative of collective action with all our practitioners. So what I'm working on is basically I am having a conversation with all the community members, with all the board members to see what we can do to strengthen this narrative and how we can help the entire community globally to take the narrative of collective action forward so that the complex issues can be solved at scale and with sustainability.
Okay, so so people are walking on this path. They're walking there. They're seeing there's no fence. They open the gate, they walk through and they close the gate and they carry on walking. Why are people doing this? Yeah, try that one.
I think that this is a warning sign.
That's not working here. Take this one.
Yeah, so I think this is a warning sign. Like you should not go there beyond this. Something is.
So there's a fear of some kind
fear.
or an anxiety that you're saying,
Yeah.
maybe if I go around, there's someone in an observatory tower watching me.
Yeah.
Okay, other ideas? Yeah, so this fear?
I have a completely opposite thought. I think it could also be comfort. Like when you see that somebody has taken this path, I can also follow along, right?
But that's also based a little bit in fear, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe.
Because it's like, okay, this is the comfortable thing to do. So maybe it's not overtly fear, but if everyone's doing it, then it must be the safe thing to do, the comfortable thing to do. Good?
Isn't that nature, like ant colony optimization? I mean, where, the ant takes the first path and everybody just follow that. So if everybody's gone that route, maybe that's the safest, maybe that's the best. Maybe there are landmines other ways.
Maybe they're landmines. Maybe there's someone in the tower with a sniper rifle, right? So maybe the fear is real, right? So we're saying, oh, why are people doing this? Just walk around. Maybe the fear is real. Maybe the reasons. So there might be some reasons today why that makes sense to go there, but maybe there were historical reasons. Maybe the fence used to be there. So we're talking about systems change, right? There's a reason we've been talking about for quite some time, but without making much progress, is because it's hard. And we, as humans, we're talking about systems. I'm going to do this quite quickly. I'm not going to turn it into an academic lecture because we're going to get to this quickly, but we did feel it was good to just touch on this for a minute. And actually, in many of the conversations I've heard here, I hear a lot of people are actually quite familiar and quite already speaking the language of systems and have quite a good understanding of complex systems. But there are systems all around us, our human bodies, and then, of course, education systems. Can you just help me think about what are the components that make up an education system, since we're at InvokED? Just you can shout out some students, teachers, management, civil society organizations, curriculum. So we've had like some people, kind of nodes of components, but then what makes it a system is that they're dynamic and they interact. Right? That the education system here in Karnataka is not going to be the same as the one in Punjab or the one in Cape Town. Right? And what makes them different, because all those nodes are the same things, but essentially the people are different, the content is different, the rules are different, and how they interact with each other is different. There's a great metaphor around thinking about simple, complicated, and complex solutions and problems. It was described by a great academic. Right? A complicated solution is like sending a rocket to the moon, because you need a recipe book that's probably several volumes long, you need lots of budgets, you need PhD students, you need a lot of time, you need a lot of money, but you can replicate it and you can send a rocket and some people to the moon. Right? That's been replicated. And the beauty of the metaphor is that the complex solution or the complex recipe is raising a child. Right? Why is that complex? Many unknowns. Aren't there lots of parenting books that tell you how to do it? Isn't there a good recipe? Each child is different. Culture specific. How many parenting books are there out there? Dr. Spock. So I've got 2 kids. There are like thousands of parenting books. All of them tell you something different, right? And I'll pick the one that actually just suits what I think anyway. But the reality is I have 2 boys. And what I did for the first one, why can't I apply that recipe for the second one? Context is different, right? The child is different, we said, but what also is different, the whole family dynamic is different. I'm different. I'm a different parent than I was for my first boy. So the thing about systems and complex systems is this interdynamic play, right? So the problem is we were all trained in education systems like that, unless you were very lucky and ended up in some special school with a special teacher, but if you're probably over 30, you were rote learning, you were kind of sitting in a linear classroom, the person in the front told you all the knowledge they needed to know and nobody asked your opinion. If you didn't go to a school like that, put up your hand. Wow. Okay, so so we're now, our mental models have all been trained and grown up in this system, and suddenly we're trying to deal with this complexity of the world we live in. And of course, this was built for an industrial era, right? I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think you know what I mean by that. So Donella Meadows was a brilliant woman who wrote this book, Limits to Growth, but she really started to describe systems, and a lot of that came from observing biological systems and ecosystems. I'm not going to spend too long. Many of you probably have seen the iceberg model, so I won't spend too much on that, but it's really about the visible things we see that we often try to change in our work, and all of these invisible things, the patterns, the underlying rules and structures, the things that are unsaid, the long-term mindsets, and the mental models we hold, which often hold back why those things aren't changing, right? Why we still keep walking through the gate. So what is systems change yet? It's starting to think about, well, what do we want to get to, and what are the things we need to start working on? So how do we get to the root causes? I'm going to go to this, rather than a definition, but this is some work we did together with Catalyse 2030 and a lot of organizations in the social entrepreneurship sector trying to address root causes by altering, shifting, transforming structures, customs, mindsets, power dynamics, and rules through collaboration and a diverse set of actors, shifting paradigms with the intent of achieving lasting societal issues on a national, local, and global level. Easy, right? So how the hell do we do that? Right. So these are our aspirations. We all want to see it, and we know it's really hard. So I'll come back to why I was a little bit allergic to the term systems change in the first place, was because we were always talking about these are the things we want to see, but not necessarily how do we get there. And that took me on a bit of a journey to work on which ended up becoming a book with a wonderful colleague of mine, Cynthia Rayner, speaking about systems work and looking at organizations and their practices, their strategies, their tactics to do systemic work, right? Whether the system change that they were working on was a 1-year time frame or a 50-year time frame, how do they do it, right? And what is different about doing systemic work versus direct impact work? And what are the practices they have? And how do you build an organization or a set of organizations or collaboration of organizations to work in those ways, to actually put that into practice? And that's very different from, I think, the organizations that many of us probably have spent many careers and time working in, which is about trying to solve the problem immediately in front of us. And the whole book basically in one slide is really this, that the principles that many of these organizations undertook, and we looked at amazing organizations from around the world, interviewed more than 110 people, did 8 in-depth case studies, and looked at how what was common was the way that they fostered connection between the different nodes in those systems, the different people, the relationships. They're really understanding about embracing context, because we see so often that we see a wonderful model and say, oh, we'll just replicate that all over the world or replicate that all over the country, and that doesn't happen because context clearly matters, and that so much was also about directly trying to reconfigure power. And the practices that actually help to build on those principles, and I'm going to really focus on the first one, but this is what we really found, and I think a lot of what I've heard here is doing all of these things. So cultivating collectives, which is building shared identity between people around objectives or around values. Equipping problem solvers, so people who actually face the issues, and we've called them primary actors. So the people that are closest to the issue, so in the case of a school, would be that interaction between the child and the teacher as the greatest point of complexity. So how do we equip those people, as well as families and others, to really be the problem solvers? And promoting platforms, and we've heard a lot about that here as well, and now with technology, the ability to do that, to really mobilize people together, and then disrupting the policies and the patterns and the mindsets. And of course, that's easy to say. But it's really the aim for me then of working in systems and thinking about systemic change is really about building responsive and representative systems. So today, that's what we're trying to do. So we're not trying to do systems change in the future. We're trying to build systems today that are responsive, can adapt, and are representative of the people in them, and are resilient, and ensuring that these primary actors are at the heart of the process. So that kind of took me to this point of then saying, okay, well, we got started to get very interested, as Sophia said, in looking at the work of collectives as one of the really interesting ways in which you can start thinking about systemic change. We lost the slides, but actually that's fine, because I was going to pause there anyway and then hand over to this panel, and then I'll come back to some slides later. Amazing people who've traveled a long way to be here, maybe Ashraf not as far, but we're delighted that they've joined us today. And we're going to ask each of them what it is that they do, so you first have an understanding, but then the how, right? The how of this happens. And as Sophia said, I think it's been 3 years now that we've been trying to really lift attention and create role models and improve the narrative and understanding in the funders world, in the global kind of audience around what collective work is. And the big realization is that it's not one thing. There are many ways of organizing collectives. And I think that's what we really want to show with you today, and the three wonderful people here, is that there are quite different ways of thinking about it. So when we even say collectives, it isn't one thing. Right. So Ashraf, can we start with you? Is that okay? Sure. So Ashraf is the co-founder of Community, amongst many other things, Prava, and of course, member of the Varta Leap Coalition. Tell us briefly about your work. Well, not that briefly, I think we have a bit of time.
I can stand up. Yeah. Thanks, François. Thank you so much. And so happy to be here. Thanks to Shaw Foundation and ShikshaLokam, because you all have been part of our collectivization journey. And I want to begin with Shaw Foundation was, you all actually, I think, made the first move for the first time in acknowledging two organizations together in your fellowship. So both Prava and Community, the youth collective, which I'm part of, was, I think, probably the first time where they enabled two organizations to be part as one. And that to me is about breaking boundaries. And that to me is about breaking silos. And that, if you're able to learn how to do that, how do we break silos of all kinds of our identities, of our lives, I think we will have a better world. Anyway, so starting on that beautiful note, François touched upon a little bit about that, how we are trained as young people. And I just want to come to that a little bit to land at the center of what we do. We work on youth leadership. And we talk about spaces. At the heart of youth leadership is the idea of spaces. What kind of spaces are needed to nurture youth leadership? And if you study the spaces that we have where young people spend most of their time, they are what? What are the spaces that young people spend most of their time? Huh? School, so education, school, college, livelihood, something, right? School and work is one space. Education and work, online, recreation, hobbies, all of that. Yeah, leisure. What are the other spaces where young people hang out? Huh? Friends, yeah, big thing. Big spaces of that of friendship. And one really big one, family, right? I think our voice is echoing. Is that better? This is better? Should I speak?
Why don't you use that mic?
Hello? Yeah, that's better. Yeah. So basically, if you look at the our society, and I'm really definitely talking about India, but it could apply elsewhere. I've worked internationally, and this really hits the bell, that the rules of these spaces are set by whom? Family, friends, education, livelihood. Who sets the rules of these spaces? Huh? Usually the adults? Yeah? How many of you think mostly the adults are setting the rules of the places? Yeah? Okay. And that is precisely what we want to shift. In a patriarchal and a hierarchical society, if we are not able to create space for young people to take their own decisions on simple things like what career will I choose, what friends I can keep or not keep, who can I marry or not marry. It's amazing. A lot of these decisions are still influenced heavily or even dictated by not the young person themselves. So our at the heart of our work is this idea of the fifth space, that because if we want real change, systemic change, we need leaders who can make the change, who can take action, who can break out of the structures that we are in today and create new structures, new ways of being, new ways of living. And that's why young people find this space called the fifth space, where they really discover themselves through volunteering and social action, through experiments of their own in the real world. And from there, they learn about life and leadership, and then they can come back to their erstwhile spaces and influence them, make changes in them. So this was important to share because all our work in Prava Community and the Vartalip Coalition is about building youth leadership, which is nurturing fifth spaces everywhere where young people can discover themselves through social action. So social engagement is a critical part of personal transformation. And fast forwarding, what we do in collectives. So Prava and Community have been working on youth leadership for many years. And thanks to the work on the ground, what happened was we were working with adolescents in schools, with college students, and over time we saw that number of young leaders were emerging who wanted to set up their own social enterprises, social organizations, and we nearly had about 1,000 young leaders in a 15-year journey who were either starting up their own independent organizations or doing change initiatives. Seeing this phenomenal leadership emerging, we felt we are not tapping the power of this. And that's when we decided to collectivize and bring together a community of practice. So Community, the Youth Collective, is a community of practice of a lot of the young leaders seeded and supported and worked with by Prava and other organizations through an initiative called Change Looms. Over the years, we worked like a community of practice. What we did was build the field of youth work, develop the principles, develop the ways of being, and we thought this will change the narrative. But of course, even after a lot of work, we realized there was something that we were not quite doing right, because we had become a nice little club of people who had a one way of being, doing, and working. And we were not really talking to the other system players who were, like François said, who were invested in youth, but really actually didn't know how to work on youth leadership in the way we wanted to do. And that's when 5 years ago, the idea of the Vartalip Coalition, Varta means dialogue, leap means to leap. And our whole idea was, how do we break out of our silo of this community of practice who believe that we know how to do things, we know how to build youth leadership, but what we needed to do is reach out to people in other sectors. So Vartalip today is a cross-sectoral coalition. What we have brought together is today it's about 137 organizations, which are not only youth engaging and youth-led, but also people from other civil society spaces working on different issues. Because we felt and also some from the private sector. We also have UN agencies. We haven't done a lot of work at the national level with governments, but at the local level, our members work with state governments. So this coalition decided that we need to work together, we need to get out of our silos, we need to bring other sectors in, and we then set up our mission. And our mission is every youth a Jagrik, every space nurturing Jagriks. And I smile because one of the members of the collective, Nagesh, is here. One of the organizations, one of the most beautiful organizations, of course, including Prava is here, Neeru is here, so just celebrating our members here. They are members of this collective, and the mission is every youth a Jagrik, every space nurturing Jagriks. And here I just want to end a little. This mission was made and written together by all of the 100 and 120 members at the time it started 5 years ago. We really saw this is like building a constitution. The way the Constitution of India was written together, we saw that we cannot run a collective without envisioning the whole and the way forward together. So this constitution was written together by the members through a very involved process. And every youth a Jagrik, every space nurturing Jagrik is the mission. Jagrik is a self-awakened, active citizen who awakens others. So it's not somebody who has to follow, somebody who really does the inner work. We talk about inside-out leadership. We believe what we need with young people, this whole collective is working on inside-out leadership, that you have to do the inner work, the hard work of the inner transformation to really make social change happen. It is not youth for development. It is youth development which is as important. And that's the mission of this coalition of 130 organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ashraf. We're going to come back to you. We're going to go to Carolyne next. Carolyne Wanyomi is the CHW, but maybe I'll translate, Community Health Worker Engagement Manager for SHIK, the Community Health Impact Coalition. So we've been hearing about a collective that grew organically from the grassroots, but what we're also learning in the world is because now this way of thinking is emerging, there are organizations that are designing themselves as collectives from the beginning, right? And I think SHIK is one of those models which very quickly, only, 5-6 years old? How old is SHIK? And is really now, I'll hand over to you to share what it is, but really now to see, okay, organizations are starting to think from the beginning that actually their model of design is collective from the beginning. So over to you, and thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. Allow me to stand. As already introduced, it's my honor and really privilege to stand before you today to discuss and share about collective action in systems change. Community Health Impact Coalition is a collection of thousands of community health workers, health organizations, and allies that work to change systems, disrupt inequalities, and make professional community health workers who are salaried, skilled, supplied, and supervised the norm. How do we do it? We do it through radical collaboration. And we know that systems change can only be impactful, and not only impactful, but we need a lasting change. We do this by engaging in guidelines through research. We have research that informs guidelines. We research alongside other health organizations to inform policy. And how do we do this? We advocate through our advocacy pillar. How do we advocate? By bringing a collection of health organizations who come together to discuss, share, and have a common understanding of the problems within the health systems and discuss ways in which to solve these health system challenges, and mostly focus on the structures, because it's really hard to dismantle a structure to favor the marginalized communities. The other way in which Community Health Impact Coalition does its work is through influencing policies at grassroots level. We work with thousands of community health workers to ensure that their voices are heard. What are we trying to solve in all this? Through this radical collaboration. For far too long, community health workers have been underrepresented, under-recognized, and not given the recognition that they deserve, knowing very well that they are the backbone of the health systems. So our role is to dismantle these inequalities, disrupt the health system so that the right thing is done, to recognize the important work that community health workers play in global health security. I will be sharing more about what we do, but then, just as a brief, we have a training program that capacity build these community health workers. We have a speakers bureau that brings out the voices of these marginalized categories to ensure that we are not only speaking on their behalf, but they are the ones taking charge in speaking and influencing this change. We also have a policy dashboard because we track policies that recognize and institutionalize community health workers. How do we track these? I will be sharing more about these in our systems. We do appreciate that Community Health Impact Coalition is still a young organization, but doing so much more to ensure that these inequalities are addressed. And we do appreciate that you are here to listen more to what we shall be talking about. In our radical collaboration, we work alongside the ministries of health. Once we have a standardized way of working, because we say, as a person, you cannot influence change, but collective voices bring in ideas, shared resources, shared information, collective research informs the data that needs to make these changes to happen. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, my bad. I said we are thousands of community health workers, health organizations. We are in over 60 countries where our members, allies, and community health workers exist. And so far, when we talk about system change, out of the 95 that we had targeted to make policy integration, recognizing community health workers, 45 now have new policies recognizing these community health workers. We are looking forward to having 102 countries recognize community health workers and really give them the recognition and the reward that they deserve.
Maybe to put that in context, given our doctor by training in public health, this has been a decades-long effort, right? That's alma mater was when? Declaration?
100 years ago. 100 years. 100 years. 100 years.
Is that better? Oh, there we go. So I was trying to put into context what was achieved in 5 years by these organizations working together has been an attempt by many national organizations to try and convince their governments to take up this international declaration of alma mater, which was really around investing in community health workers. And I'm not going to make an argument around why community health workers are necessary, but there's been such slow progress. And in fact, in the 90s and 2000s, there was actually a regression on how community health workers were budgeted, supported, etc. And it was left to volunteerism, it was left to NGOs, when it's such a critical part of health promotion and prevention and treatment diagnosis for the majority of people in the world. So what has been achieved in 5 years by the power of coordination, research and advocacy at a global level, national level, is truly, truly astounding. So I just wanted to kind of put that work into context. 5 years versus like decades of trying to do this work. So just really a great congratulations. So it takes me now to James Parker, who's Principal Project Manager at ProForest and also running this initiative of the Africa Sustainable Commodities Initiative. We were talking about different models of collectives. Here is one that is deeply rooted in governments committing to work together. What does that look like?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And also thank you for the opportunity to come here and share our experience. So I'm going to talk about application of system change in agriculture and natural resources management. So we started with the oil palm sector, where we had serious problem. West and Central Africa we have about 70 to 65% of the population in agriculture, and mostly smallholder farmers. And in the 90s, we saw a phenomenon, movement of big companies coming to take lands for oil palm development, rubber, and then other commodities. And so when they came, because the systems were not good in the sense that government controls everything, in some of the areas, they give them vast land, and then you go and there are communities there. So there were social issues on land, conflict, some of them violent conflict in Liberia, resulting in death and a whole lot of things. So we had problems in the oil palm sector. And countries decided to address it in silos. It didn't work. And so like-minded organizations sat down and thought about it and said, this one cannot be solved by one country. We need a collective action. And it got discussed into the consumer forum. And then through TFA, African Palm Oil Initiative started. So we got a commitment at a higher level where stakeholders said, before we can sit down and talk, we need commitment from government, because government is the problem, one of the major problems. So once government said, whatever that comes to me, I'll implement, we will discuss. So we got commitment from government at a higher level. So 8 countries signed what we call a declaration at the climate summit in Marrakesh, that they are going to commit to whatever stakeholders will discuss. Then we came down to the national level. So after signing the agreement, signing the declaration, 2 other countries joined. So I'm talking about Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and then the Congo Basin, Cameroon, DR Congo, Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and Gabon. So these countries are part of this initiative. So at the presidential level, they asked ministers to sign. And then we came to the national level where we set up platforms to discuss. The amazing thing is that it came from top up. Top up because those who are affected by these actions and those who affect, so those who are causing, for the first time sat down to discuss, to understand why my action is affecting you and what I'm going through. So together we develop what we call national principles and action plan. So now we are at a level where countries are implementing this action plan. And the impact is so great because it has caused changes in laws. For instance, in Liberia, there has been what we call the Land Right Act, where land has now been given to the communities. Previously, it was nationalized, so land didn't belong to anybody. It belongs to government. So the government decides on who to give the land. Now, the land belongs to the communities. And so if you're a company and you go there and you want to do agriculture, you have to seek their consent. And they will sit down with you. Previously, they were, in fact, in Liberia, some of the conflict was destroying sacred groves. You know, these guys are religious. They live with the forest. And they know how to manage. And they have lived with the forest for several years. And then all of a sudden, the forest is open up. And so they sit down with the communities and discuss. And then together, they map the areas that they want to give to you. In Ghana, it has resulted in setting up what we call the Tree Crop Development Authority. So institutional changes, structure changes within Ghana, where this institution has been set up to look at oil palm development. And the interesting thing is that when we're discussing in Ghana, government said, no, the problem in oil palm is not only oil palm. It is also in rubber, cashew. And so let's add all these crops and set up an organization or institution with government mandate backed by a law to implement responsible agricultural commodities. In Nigeria, it resulted in the change of, development of land use planning for one state called Edo State, where oil palm is grown, and setting up of institutions to manage forests or implement land use plan, where they have a program they call PPR, Produce, Protect, Rehabilitate, where companies come in and they involve smallholders as cooperative to supply them. And so it's not only a company benefiting, but also the communities also benefit. So it has triggered a number of changes within these 10 countries. Maybe when the questions come and they are specific, I will answer them. And it was not a smooth sailing. we have come 10 years in this journey, starting from 2015 up to now. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Please, as the moderators were saying earlier, more clapping, more clapping. I'm sure we've all seen many government declarations signed that went nowhere. Right. So I think what's really interesting here is like, what's the mechanism that takes that government political will and then turns it into action that I think we're really interested in. So now we're going to delve down. I'm going to ask them, but maybe we'll be shorter now on our answers because I want you to jump in with some questions and ideas as well. We're going to break down the how a little bit. You've already started to tell us how, but James was identifying that it's not always smooth sailing. So what are the practices that you're doing that helps to break the silos between organizations that have been working in a certain way for maybe decades, community health worker organizations, that encourage organizations to find that shared identity and to have a stake in and to invest time, because like doing this work is time with not an immediate outcome and not even a clear outcome. So what are the things you're doing to bring and to hold those groups together, break down the silos, and if there are any challenges along the way, maybe how you overcome them. So maybe think of one or two things that you do that you think are really special in that regard. And any of you can answer, but whoever wants to go first.
Okay. So, yeah. So, I think some of the things is about design. How do you design collectives? And I think what we early on figured and we framed a way in how we are going to collectivize, and just want to introduce what the framing that we use. We use the idea of what's important in collectives is three things: seeing together, being together, and doing together. Very simple, but very hard to do. Chief executives of organizations coming from different places across the country, coming together to decide on a common agenda is one of the hardest parts. One is, like François said, people don't have the time. Second is, we all have our own organization agenda sitting on top of our heads. I mean, it's that whole, what is more important, the personal or the collective? And both are important, and how do we take both along? So the seeing together becomes really critical. And in seeing together, I want to share is, I think what was really special, what Varta Leap Coalition did, was early on decided and built the narrative around, we will not frame our entire work. We will work on different issues which are related to youth leadership, but we will frame it into a common conversation around constitution. So there was a lot of time spent on unifying everybody across different issues, whether it was gender or masculinities or polarization. So we do work on that, but we gave it a common language of the Indian Constitution and the Constitution values. And we thought, what brings us together are the values of justice, freedom, fraternity, and equality. And that's what allowed us to then start talking to each other across the different issues that we were working with one language. And I think that's really important. How do we see together and how do we build the narrative? The other is the language of, therefore, inside-out youth leadership. That we are which were in the collective, took a long time to come around to why inner work is important. And I think that's, so this is one. And second one I want to share, there are many, but second one, do I have a few minutes? Is the being together. So being together, we believe that the existence of the collective in itself is an outcome. And the being together is the relational aspects. There are many collectives where, you will go, you will do stuff, you have a mission. So we are all like, working away at the mission, but we don't spend time to relate, engage. Who are the people in this room? Like, ideally we'd like to have a conversation by hearing who everyone is here. How can we do this conversation without really knowing who is there in the room? So This is also done through organizing exchanges between people. So, and the being together is just for the well-being of the collective and the well-being of each individual in the collective and each organization. So looking out for the well-being is critical. The last thing is, of course, what we do together. That has to be kick-ass. That has to be really transformational. And I can just say the Vartali Coalition has done fantastic work. It has some of the most creative designs and execution, joint programming in the areas of toxic masculinity, in the areas of polarization, the real issues that matter. What do they want to do? What can they best do? What does the world need? What is best with young people? What can we co-construct? They do pilots and then they do collect.
Just said, at Community Health Impact Coalition, we have that narrative building again, where partners come together. By partners, I mean health organizations that have the same mission and vision that we have. So we collaborate in terms of shared resources, sharing shared time, sweat equity, to ensure that we are all working to make professional community health workers. So what are we doing alongside the Ministry of Health? And this has helped in terms of avoiding duplication of resources, duplication of activities. For example, if I am training a certain region, the other partner should go and train the other region. So if our common objective is to advocate for community health workers, partners have to come together to ensure that when we approach the Ministry of Health, we are going as a unified voice. I would give an example of where we have the NGO collaboration, that is in Kenya, called CHU for UHC, that is Community Health Unit for Universal Health Coverage. In Malawi, we have Shik partners in Malawi, where what one partner says is supported by the others, and we speak to the ministry as one unit to influence the change that we would want to see happen to the community health workers. And this is in terms of advocating for resources, policy reforms, reviewing of the policies we participate. The other thing we have done to ensure this is enhancing the Community Health Workers Speaker Bureau. I said for far too long, community health workers have been left out of these conversations concerning their own health workforce. We have embraced a slogan that says, nothing about us without us. So community health workers sit in all conversations concerning their health workforce. They have a voice, so we are no longer talking on their behalf, but they are speaking for themselves. And we know when they speak for themselves, we all win, the communities win. They have the lived experience to share what needs to change in the communities. We also have a training program for community health workers on community advocacy. This takes them through understanding what are the health worker programs, how are they started, what are the initiatives, and what is it that is required in health system strengthening. How do they advocate? How do they make coalitions? How do they tell their story to influence the change that they want to see? Not just for themselves as community health workers, but for the patients that they serve, because they know the real challenges in the community. So through this training program, they also engage in technology tools. So they learn through their phones, they do the training, they go out and implement exactly what they have learned. That is being part of the Speaker Bureau, going to the community, attending meetings within their national governments, global and regional conversations. As I sit here today, a conference is happening in Rwanda. I have 3 community health workers speaking about their profession in that conference. I don't know if we have any here, but I represent them for today. So that is basically what happens to influence this change. So when these conversations are going on, you realize that then governments notice that it's not only one person who has the interest of the community. Everybody has the interest of the community. So coming together really creates change rather than going in silos. So that togetherness makes the change. We also have what we call tracking policies. In tracking policies, governments and ministries have been put to task. We have what we call the Community Health Worker AIM tool, and AIM means Assessment Improvement Matrix. So we look around the countries that we have targeted alongside our members and allies. How are they living up to these changes that we want to see? It's one thing for monies to come within the countries and for people to say we are improving community health worker programs, but then we don't see that. So through this, we are able to track and check on what exactly is going into community health worker program. So all this, when brought together, is what is making the changes. We make the leaders accountable to what they have promised to do. The community health workers hold the responsible leaders accountable. You would want for me to bring change in the community. Have you looked at my welfare? If I am not well taken care of, the patients, the people that the doctors refer to me because I am at the grassroots level, how will they then get the services? You have to improve my working conditions for me to be able to influence and convince the community that health is really a personal responsibility. Those are just among the few that we employ to ensure that systems change. When we all of us get involved, then we all win as a community.
How did it work? Number one, bringing together like-minded NGOs, civil society organizations, was a challenge. Each organization has its own vision, so coming up with a common vision was a huge challenge. Some dropped off the road. They were very important. You don't just tell them, go away. You have to bring them. So together, you become a forceful, a big force. We approach government with data. Government, if you don't sign this decree, if we don't act this way, it will not work. And you know, government wants you to prove to him why he should take certain decision. And taking that decision means losing some power, which is very difficult. So we were able to come together and then approach government in each country with data, with information, and then they realized that it is better we address this way, these issues bottom up. That is the first one. So when we had the commitment, we solved one problem. Now, how do we bring the stakeholders, the actors, to sit down and develop their own principles and action? How do I sit down with my enemy to dialogue? Somebody who is taking my land and has created difficult for me in my livelihood. And livelihood is life and death. So how do I sit down with this person and then create a vision, a common vision? And most of the people who are affected are also people down there. I remember in one of the meetings, you see these companies with tie, nice dressed suit, and then these community people, and then some of them have not even entered an air conditioning room, and then sitting down to dialogue with such. You need to bring them, you need to build their capacity in a way that they can also dialogue. So in doing all these things, we're able to create the conducive environment for stakeholders to sit down and then talk to each other. And you know, in developing vision together, it was nice. You become friends. You were enemies, but then you become friends. And you see coalitions within the stakeholder processes. And it was beautiful. We came out with, each country came out with principles and action plan that touches all aspects of the oil palm sector. So from land acquisition, from processing, from involving communities in that venture for them to also benefit. So in a country like Nigeria, in Edo State, if you need concession, you need to come out with a strategy to involve local people, maybe cooperative or scheme farmers, so that they will also benefit from that. So this is the journey we went through during the 10 years to achieve this.
Thank you so much for summarizing that. I want to pick out two things from this discussion that the first was something I mentioned when we were speaking about what does systems change, how do systems work, and we spoke about power. One of the realities for most of you, do most people here work in the social sector or NGO sector? Some in governments? Okay, if you work in the social sector or civil society sector, put up your hand. Okay, if you work in a government institution or body? Okay, not in the room, so we can talk about that. Oh, there's one. She put up her hand please don't target me. No, I wanted to speak about power. And the reality is that the big difference between those sectors that government and business have power, right? And the social sector often is fragmented, right? And we don't recognize and understand the power we have. And so much about changing systems is about changing power dynamics. So for me, one of the most significant ways in doing that is building what are collectives actually about, is about building solidarity and power, right? To shift systems, at the root of the cause of what we're really talking about, so that when you go to the government and say, we are speaking with one voice, you can't speak to anyone else, we represent the perspectives, you're saying we have all of these actors together, that's a critical piece of what's happening here. The other thing you spoke about was a little bit around resistance and maybe the unlikely partners and how you need to spend time and effort to bring them on board. And I want to go back to a slide where I have a quote from Adam Kahane. I think it's this one. So Adam Kahane is actually part of the Schwab Foundation as well. We have these thought leaders who join us. He's a really interesting man he's a facilitator. He facilitated the process to design the scenarios of the future of South Africa during the apartheid transition. He did the peace process in Colombia, and he's written a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, a book called Power and Love, a book called Everyday Habits of Transforming Systems, which was actually inspired by meeting a bunch of Schwab Foundation fellows, and facilitating breakthroughs. And he has this, which he wrote recently, I think, in response to one of our convenings, bringing collectives together. Collaboration across differences is both increasingly necessary and increasingly difficult. To address the challenges we face, we need to work with unlike others from diverse organizations, sectors, and backgrounds, whether from down the street or across the globe. But our tendency, amplified by our politics, psychology, and social media, is to categorize others as right or wrong, good or bad, friend or enemy, is making us harder for us to do what we need to do. Collective social innovators are pioneering ways to narrow this gap. And if you think about the world we're living in today with increasing polarization, politicization, this has to be a way of working, and we have to be open to not only working with those who share the vision, but those who don't share the vision, right? And find those ways to build new visions together. So I wanted to thank this group. I want to open up. We have some time for some interaction, some questions. So if you want to share maybe a little bit of what you're doing when you stand up and talk, or you want to ask a question to any of these wonderful panelists, please join us. And I think our group's going to get bigger as people join the plenary, which is great. So let's take some questions from the... Oh, yeah, thank you, Sophia.
Hi, yeah. Let me just stand up. Yes. Hi, I'm Radhika. So I work at this non-profit called Project Defy. We run community learning spaces. We informally call them schools without teachers, exams, or curriculum. So it's quite an innovative space. And I think my question kind of stems from that. I'm kind of very inspired by the work that you do, Ashraf. I've just noted down the question. Hold on. Yeah, so we find that there's not enough evidence generated for the kind of work that we do, which makes it harder to kind of collaborate and, say, influence, especially people in power, or even people, say, in the other non-profit space. So does, say, thought leadership play a part in the work that you do? And if it does, what does it look like?
Oh, okay. I am Deepika, and I've been in social sector for good 2 decades. Currently, I'm consulting. I'm part of Adaptability team with Ashraf and others. My question is, James, and to you, Caroline, since you mentioned about kind of doing this work with the government and also say with business or the market as such, and stakeholders value different things, right? A farmer would value something very different, and the market and people of market value something very different, right? So when your stakeholders have very different set of things which they value in terms of, I would give more value to profit, the other one is giving more value to, you know, my soil does not, or my land does not need to deplete over a period of time. How do you get them to collaborate? Because for them, the outcomes are very different. So in a larger context, and I'm also thinking more like, how do we democratize tech where the market has taken over and doesn't allow, you know, others to work, but really wanting to learn from your experience of how do you get to then collaborate such actors?
One more question, and then we'll do answers. Do you remember?
So yeah, I'm Dr. Kumudini Ravindra, and I have my own startup called Blue Lotus Engineering. But we do a lot of work in education and policy design and so on as well. I was very inspired by what you said about, you know, seeing, being, and doing together. But one of the aspects that you also talked about was doing the inner work. So I think as stakeholders that come in to contribute to the larger cause, I think it's very important for them to transform themselves inside out, like you said. But the other challenge then is, as a collective, how do you grow the collective? It's easy to get people who are like-minded initially, but how do you grow the collective, and how do you ensure that the sanctity of that collective is retained? Because sometimes what happens is there is a tendency to kind of dilute those principles over time. So how do you handle that aspect? So, thank you.
Thanks for your question. Certainly around thought leadership, I personally have some trouble with that word, thought leadership. Okay, I think the experienced leadership is what is most important. So anyway, don't get me wrong, all of you thought leaders here, but I think it's very important, and how you make that happen. I'm trying to understand what you're trying to ask, and it's really about how do you actually show change and how do you influence others. And to me, there is nothing like, and it may be laborious, it may be time consuming, it may cost a little bit of money, but really actually taking people to the ground at the site of action. Or now, of course, we have audiovisual tools. So really visually making people experience the transformation that is happening on the ground, there's nothing to beat that, is my feeling. Just conversations don't make it happen entirely. So that's one. The other is, of course, writing. And I think now, the civil society, we have not been investing enough in evidence and also writing. And now there are many more professional organizations coming. I think there's a good thing in a sense. There is investment in evidence beginning to happen. I'm associated with a couple of collectives in another capacity, in life skills, in social learning and early childhood development. There are collectives in formation. And the philanthropies have come in a big way to support setting up evidence tracking and metrics making. So we are participating in that exercise, and I think we should do much, much more of that. So I don't have a clear answer to that. To your question, if I can just say, maybe others can actually take it, so let me not hog this.
I'll start by saying that we said that we collaborate, radical collaboration. So our activation starts at the grassroots. So community health workers, community members actually know who is after their best interest. So when members join the coalition, they do not just join. They are voted in by the existing members. And what do they look at? They look at what exactly is your mission, what is your vision, are you willing to walk the journey of making professional community health workers? Are you ready to influence a workforce that is salaried, skilled, supervised, and supplied? For members that do not align with that mission, most of them don't get to be voted in. So we move with the like-minded people. And community health workers themselves have this initiative of identifying with their local leaders. So the influence also comes from the grassroots, the local leaders, the government officials themselves. And unfortunately, sometimes it's being used by, it is unfortunate, but fortunate at some point, because when advocating, some political leaders come in and say, you know, these community health workers are our voters. They visit households. They have been assigned members of the community to supervise or to check on their health status. So what they do is that they try to align with what is happening. And the easiest part for us has been, it has helped in the assemblies to enact the bylaws within the counties and also pass the national policies, because they feel we need to be aligned with what exactly our people demand. Yeah, thank you.
I think there is a very difficult question. Some of the stakeholders still have divergent views, but we are working together, especially in area of land where the law came into force, and traditional authorities, because of fear of losing authority over the land, they didn't want the way it went. Like, women don't have access to land, and they want to keep it like that. But government has a policy of gender inclusion. How do we address it? Traditional authorities say, no, for this, we don't want to discuss at all. So we try to find, in the divergent views, you will always have a common interest somewhere. So you try to find that common interest. It may be small, a small light, but can bring hope. And you try to work around that. What we observe is that in the process, some divergent views also help us to think about how we developing laws and principles, and trying to also look at it from their angle. You only have divergent views when you are looking at. There was one facilitator who painted a scenario where there's 6, but when you stand here, you see it at 9, and when I stand here, I see it at 6. But it's the same figure. So why don't I come here and look at it from your perspective and understand how you are seeing it? So we use a number of ways to address it. Some of them we are still struggling, especially with the law, where the traditional authorities are saying that in our tradition, somebody told me 800 years ago, women doesn't have access to land, and we still want to maintain. Why do you don't want to maintain? Why do you ask them why? And there's a fear somewhere. If you are able to address that fear somehow, you have the authority anyway, but give access and then explain why women inclusion is important. In Liberia, it was simple because they had a president who was a woman. So if a woman has become a president, why can't a woman contribute to the development? So once you have such examples and then also see a small opportunity, you can bring them together. But it's not easy.
So the lesson is more women presidents. Right. No, not joking, actually, because mental models, right? I mean, thousands of years of patriarchy, that can shift. Right, so we're almost out of time, so let's take one last, unless there are any more burning questions.
Right.
You can take it, let's get this question, and then she can do it as we wrap up. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Subir. I am the former Educational Quality Improvement Advisor to the Government of India, and I work on improving the quality of education systems for the last 30 years. That's what I've been doing. So 2 things which always bother us in our sector is that sometimes we assume that the system is a benevolent system, that an education system exists for improving education. But actually, it may have another purpose, like preserving the education system as it is instead of improving it, or preserving hierarchies as they exist instead of breaking them through better education. So how do you then enable that system, which has a vested interest in continued hierarchy to shift is an issue. It's also concerning that when we talk of collective action, many of us who ought to become a collective, a system is also a way of thinking. We are affected by that way of thinking. We tend to believe funders are very important, key officials are very important, maybe they'll be champions of change, but actually they may or may not be. And we kowtow to them, and in the process, we take part in the same hierarchies which are actually anti-child or anti-education. And we are therefore not able to come together because our donors or our champions also do not see eye to eye. So in that sense, we end up becoming part of the system instead of actually confronting it or enabling it to change or enabling it to become different. And that's something to think about. And if there's anything you know of which can help overcome either of these, dealing with a non-benevolent, for example, Donald Trump has just shut down the education department of US. Dealing with that kind of system, or not to become the system itself while trying to get it to be different.
Great questions. Thanks for so I'll just let you all wrap up. If there's anything you want to say and address maybe these last two comments.
So thanks everybody for all the wonderful questions, and I want to just share, as you would know, there are so many experiments actually in schools and in the education system. In fact, the number of civil society organizations invested in this space is phenomenal, and the work is absolutely outstanding. I think what is the effort now is to show it up and advocate for it so that the stories are out there, that this difference is happening. And I think there is no, we all know that, and that's what a lot of organizations in this country are doing, phenomenal ones for many years, and they're showing it. That young people, if we are able to create spaces within the school system for young people to be heard, to listen, and to also develop their own social change initiatives within the school, that gives them the space to begin to feel that they can actually lead and inform and influence. And we've seen that in every youth and education organization that is working. So there are many such spaces that have happened, and we'd love to share more. And regarding you, I think I just want to share, I agree with you. If there is too much dissonance in the collective, and if you get a completely different value system into it, it can completely shake up, and we may land up breaking it up. So there are ways to do that, and one way we try to do is, we created a whole series of conversations inspired by Adam Kahane, François shared, and which is really to look at, we created a series of conversations called Beyond Right or Wrong. And these were conversations with civil society organizations, youth leaders. They were open conversations across the country led by our members. And this was about talking about the issues that matter to young people without the lens of right or wrong. It was just allowing. Sometimes we just need to create those spaces. They may not be inside the collective, but we have to build it in the larger ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Just to wrap it up, initially it was very difficult to have a community health worker participate in any conversation because they were seen as people of low literacy levels. They are not confident enough to speak. Right now on our speaker bureau, we have over 91 community health workers who are representing other community health workers in global conversations, including the Africa CDC webinars and conferences, United General Assembly meetings, and also the World Health Assembly. So they are speaking out and giving their real perspectives in the communities. On our training platform, we have over 15,000 members, community health workers enrolled, and out of that we have 5,000 who have been certified. So I welcome you all. You can meet me after this. I'll share the link so that you are able to just have an experience of what this training is all about. It's a progressive web app, and you can learn. It is in French, Spanish, English, and Swahili. So it has really empowered these community health workers, and that is what is informing change. And one of the changes that has happened in Kenya is that the president recognized the community health workers and changed their name from volunteers to community health promoters. That is what coming together can really create. In terms of NGO collaboration, we have countries coming together and influencing these policies. And as I mentioned earlier, 45 out of 95 have national policies in place. Thank you.
For me, I think the last thing I'll say is what one difficult thing to change is the mindset. Once you are able to change the mindset, you'll be able to change the systems. Because it's the humans who set up the system and run the system. And the resistance comes from the human who has this mindset. And in our work, we realize that once you are able to change the mindset of the NGOs who came together, the stakeholders, you'll be able to change the system. So it's very important, changing mindset. And then there's also power in people whose mindset have been changed, coming together to impact society. Thank you.
One thing I just want to share, thanks James. You know, everybody talks about the theory of change, and we have been started saying, let's change it and call it theory of mindset change. If all of us started looking at our work from that lens, maybe we would have real systems change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And indeed, thanks for all the comments and questions. I think, you know, we're always part of the system. I don't think we can ever say we're outside of it. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think the way to think about it is that inside out piece and doing the inner work. I also wanted to thank learning about how to actually make systems representative of people, whether it's smallholder farmers or community health workers. That's not something we've figured out well how to do yet often in our platforms and collectives and when we advocate or when we even decide for other people. So some really important insights there. The last piece I wanted to speak about was the fact that I started and I showed you that blackboard, you know, and that education system we were all educated in, or maybe de-educated. I'm not sure exactly right, but there is a quote here from Yuval Noah Harari, who many of you may know, wrote *Sapiens*. That book, he's got a book called *Nexus*. And so while maybe that was a depressing picture of the blackboard, this is maybe a more hopeful message to end on, that we can do this work. That really humans rule the world, not because we are so wise, but because we are the only animals that can cooperate flexibly in large numbers. And that humanity's superpower is actually collaboration. So we have it within us. We need to de-learn some of the things. We need to be aware of the systems we operated in. And finally, I just wanted to say that our work at the Schwab Foundation is now to try and kind of really lift up the narrative, the stories, but also we need the evidence, right? We need to start demonstrating, and I think we've already seen here on this panel, and thank you for all your work, that actually working in these ways is not just about talking and building relationships, but that leads to these longer term, quite significant outcomes that often as single organizations we can't achieve. So I think we're starting to see the value and the return on all the investment that it takes, both financially and relationship-wise, to build these platforms. So thank you so much to our panelists. You've been amazing. Lots of applause. And thanks to all of you for coming. And I think you have 20 minutes or so until the plenary, maybe handing over, and a big thank you then to Sophia and Ashwarya, who really helped to design today's session. So thanks to both of you. Big applause, big applause. Tell them, okay, so they come back here for the... They're staying now? No break, no tea? Nothing, okay. Maybe stand up and stretch your legs. Thank you all.
Okay.